Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As Johnny said, I'm from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators. Let me just find out first, am I alone? Because before I joined the Institute, I used to be in a registrar, and I get really uncomfortable if I haven't had a vote or a show of hands or something like that. So, hands up all those who are company secretaries. Excellent. Hands up all those who aren't. Right, so you're the ones who aspire to be company secretaries. I hope some of my colleagues at the back were taking note there because they can be around with membership forms and things like that for you. So anyway, as I said, my name is Peter and I'm a company secretary. I know what all of those of you who aspire to be company secretaries think of us. Company secretaries have a different self-image. That's a bit sexist, though, because there are a lot of lady company secretaries, and that, my lud, is the case for the defence for having that picture in a professional presentation. So, given that we have these different self-images, what is the role, the corporate governance role of the company secretary and the role of the company secretary in reporting? It's not kept in compliance. It's not making sure that all the boxes are ticked. That's important, and that is certainly something that the company secretary will be doing. But it's more than that. It's making sure that the report conveys the views of the board about what the company is doing and about what the key issues are, the key strategic issues are that the company's been dealing with during the year. But it's also not a corporate policeman. And as well as that, it's certainly not somebody who is sitting there prepared to snitch on everything that the rest of the company is thinking about. So there's a lot more to it than that. It's around corporate governance. And what do we say about corporate governance? Well, there's a really, really good definition of what corporate governance is right in the start of the Corporate Governance Code. And it talks about it being to facilitate effective entrepreneurial and prudent management that can deliver the long-term success of the company. And I say there's a longer definition of that. But the really important thing I'd like you to focus on there is the way that governance is about the board's responsibility for making sure that the company is effectively run, for providing the leadership, supervising the management, and reporting to shareholders on their stewardship. And it's that last bit that is really, really key. So it's about putting in place a set of processes which enable management to run the business effectively and in a commercial manner. Processes which follow the constitution of the company, because let's face it, that's kind of the contract between shareholders and the company. The agreement between owners and managers as to how managers will exercise their authority. Processes which ensure that the business will comply with relevant law and regulation, and which will give due weight to appropriate societal norms, because let's face it, every company needs kind of a license to operate. But processes, we all know processes are bad when people put a process in place. You want to move the business ahead, but processes get in the way. They're just a pain in the neck, aren't they? Is that what you think? Do you think they're a couple of foot below that? Processes are about governance, and is governance an end in itself? If you think back, Enron won loads and loads of awards for governance, notably from Fortune magazine, which dubbed it the most innovative company. On paper, it had an absolutely model board of directors, all the great and the good. So did RBS. Were these governance tools effectively applied? Were the issues that arose simply completely unexpected? Because let's face it, nobody expects a corporate governance crisis. I don't know. But one of the key aspects of good corporate governance is the identification and the appropriate management of risk. Because isn't that what business is all about? Entrepreneurial risk, taking risk in order to get profit. If you don't take any risks at all, you might just well put your money quietly under the bed and, you won't make that much on it. But the appropriate management of risk is what's key. And that might mean acceptance of risk, perhaps in identifying what the company's risk appetite is. Don't really like the term risk appetite, but I think it does. Identifying the amount of risk that the company is prepared to take on in order to make the profits that it's hoping to make. Mitigation of those risks. So identifying what the risks are and then seeing what the company can do that will reduce the impact or likelihood of those risks. Or simply risk avoidance. And that's not necessarily avoidance in a bad way, that might be just avoidance in the sense of, okay, fine, well, if we do this, it's going to incur this risk, therefore we'll simply decide not to do this thing that incurs that risk. But in all cases, that requires the identification, the assessment, and the reporting of risk. Because risks can come in a variety of forms. You can have strategic risk, operational risk, reputational risk, and many of you will remember the campaigns against Starbucks for their, shall we say, creative tax planning. People risk, because one of the biggest risks for many companies is what some idiot in their office will do. The biggest cyber risk is that somebody will have written down a password somewhere and somebody else will see it. So that's, again, a key risk. All businesses engage in some sort of risk management. That can be as simple as a window cleaner deciding on a particularly windy day that he'll only clean the bungalow windows on his round that day and not go up 4 flights of sort of a tower block or something like that. The governance of risk is simply the process by which that management takes place. And at one time, it was simply a question that companies were expected to make money, nothing else mattered. And it's far more complicated than that. We've seen that as well as doing that, they're required to conform to laws. They must comply with the ethical norms of the society in which they operate. And if they don't, they'll be liable to legal and moral sanctions. Why is that? It's because the owners of the company, the shareholders, those who control the environment in which the company operates, that might be the politicians, press, public, will all have differing priorities. It's simply not tenable that to assume that they will all want the same things. That's why you have ethical funds. That's why you have high or low risk investments. And so some of the traditional corporate measures will suit some of the stakeholders some of the time. They're unlikely to suit all of the stakeholders all of the time. And consequently, the managers of the company have to balance the conflicting interests of owners with the conflicting interests of regulators, the press, and the public at large. And we all become increasingly technologically aware. How many people in the room are tweeting today? Yeah, I thought there might be a few, particularly from the home team. But yeah, lots and lots of people are doing that. And these considerations therefore become increasingly important. And so a corporate governance code is designed, amongst other things, to stop companies going off the rails and give them confidence to operate in the society in which they work. That, by the way, is German police dogs in training. I do not know what happens if one of the dogs fails its training. I suspect it's not that good for the cat. But it's quite impressive. You can see 1 or 2 of those at the back really focused on where that cat is. Anyway, I sometimes feel a bit like that when I'm giving a presentation. But the critical issue with all of this, therefore, is reporting. And it's reporting the risks and the way in which those risks are managed. Clearly and explicitly linking the risks that are being taken by the company with the strategy the company is pursuing, linking both with the governance parameters that are in place, linking all that to operational performance, KPIs, things like that, and linking that to pay, because there are ways in which remuneration can be used as a risk management tool. And for me, that's the importance of risk in reporting, is that you can actually draw it all together. And we've heard a little bit about integrated reporting. And for me, a really good report is one that integrates all those factors to give a comprehensive overview of the way in which the company is being managed. And I just thought it was worth drawing out some of the quotes here from the ICSA awards, particularly in the category around audit and risk reporting. And some of the things that we looked at when we were looking at some of the winning reports. Reports that demonstrated an understanding that taking risks is the nature of business. Link those risks and their mitigation back to the strategy and business model, KPIs, remuneration. And as I said, a description of how remuneration was used as a risk management tool. Anybody would think I'd read this presentation before. Risk governance, showing evidence that the company's risk management is dynamic in terms of the identification of new risks, improvement or deterioration in the impact of existing risks, development of better mitigation practice, the response to external environmental changes. For example, how high impact but low frequency risks can be managed. And one question which occurred to me when we were looking at this, why did more companies not see the activities of their competitors as a significant risk? I mean, I suppose everybody would argue that their competitors are really rubbish, but deep down you probably accept most of your competitors are probably not that bad. Why aren't they a significant risk? Principal risks and risk mitigation. How many risks are principal for your company? Having a thick end of 20 principal risks might be right. You might have a lot of risks. You might be involved in a very, very risky company. But it always feels to me that more than a few begs some explanation as to why you have so many risks that you would define as principal. Now, I know these areas are fraught with difficulty, especially for those companies with US listings and the consequent, shall we say, interference, is that a suitably polite word, of US lawyers in a UK reporting process. But UK companies need to remember this is a UK report, and therefore they're required to discuss their principal risks. They're required to indicate what they're doing to mitigate them. Internal audit. Anybody work in internal audit? Oh, good, I can say some rude things about them. Good risk reporting will also include an explanation of how the internal audit function is managed in a business, usually both in the risk section of the strategic report and in the report of the relevant committee. Now, that will probably include disclosure of how the controls have been improved, perhaps as a result of an incident or change, and do be open about incidents that have happened to you, because I tell you this, there will be people who know about it, and your investors will have been following the newspapers. And if there is something that you know has happened to your company during the year and it's been in the press, people will be looking in your annual report as to, well, what have you done about it? How have you mitigated that risk? And finally on the slide, there's some of the reports that won awards and that were highly commended. Somebody said to me a few months ago that a rally driver, you might wonder where this is going, but there is a point to it, honestly, that a rally driver looks at the brakes in his car, and if you ask a rally driver what are the brakes in his car for, they are not to make his car go slower, they are not to stop his car, they are to make his car go faster. I thought, well, that's illogical. When I put my foot on the brake, the car stops. But actually it's because if you're pressing the accelerator all the time, when you go into a corner, there's an excellent chance you'll go and hit a tree somewhere. If you brake going into the corner, you can then accelerate out of it. And people say to me sometimes, well, corporate governance, doesn't that put the brakes on the way in which a business is operating? Business prevention officer, I think you've sometimes heard people called that. I don't agree. The brakes can make it go faster, and it's also kind of like a corporate seatbelt, hence that picture. And that's why it's important, and why the reporting of what you're doing, particularly around the risks that the company is taking, is important as well. And that's me. Thank you very much.